Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Lisa Novak. I am a clinical psychologist in the community and a Catch board member. I'm going to make this extremely brief because we have lots of incredible information to share with you today about technology and social conflict, a ubiquitous issue to parenting these days. I'm honored to introduce to you our speaker, Dr. Sonya Sandhu. Dr. Sandhu is a board-certified child and adolescent psychiatrist and a graduate from Anne and Robert H. Lurie Children's Hospital. She currently practices at Plena Mind Center in Northbrook, and she has taken a special interest in the role of social media on mental health. Dr. Sandhu, thank you so much for being here with us today, and I will let you take it from here.
Thank you, Lisa. Thank you for that introduction. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks again for taking the time to join us today. Again, my name is Dr. Sandhu, and I'm a practicing outpatient child and adolescent psychiatrist at Plena Mind Center. I'm very excited to be here today for this opportunity to speak with you all about this very important topic. For many of the children in our community, navigating the difficulties of social conflicts can be challenging enough. And now with the integration of technology and social media, this has added an additional layer of complexity. A common question I often receive from parents is, how do we support children through some of those unique challenges that technology and social media pose, which will be the focus of our conversation today. The one takeaway I hope we all achieve by the end of this hour is for everyone to be able to learn and reinforce at least one way to promote a healthy relationship between a child and their social media use. First, we'll start with an introduction of exploring different definitions in learning. How does technology make things different, and why are things so much harder? Secondly, what can parents and other caregivers do? What are some practical ways to provide support for your child when they're directly affected by technology's harm? And lastly, how can we bring a sense of empowerment back? A common theme I frequently come across in conversation is a feeling that teens report of a loss of control. Feeling the need to be online, posting constantly, and answering immediately, it can not only be exhausting, but it often goes to a place feeling out of obligation. How can we help our kids feel more of a choice there? And how can we all be more mindful of what we choose and not choose to be a part of online? It's important to create space online to be our authentic selves. To start, I wanted to share this information I recently came across. The statement, which can be found in its full version online, was styled as an alert to gathering psychiatrists from across the country. It served as a reminder that while social media use amongst our children and teens is on the rise, so are the rates of both depressive and anxiety-related disorders. It's important that we continue to research the connection between them. Furthermore, the statement urged tech companies to enforce stricter regulations of both age of access and content that is presented that may produce harm. A sign that, unfortunately, such problematic content is becoming more prevalent. And lastly, from an educational perspective, it encouraged mental health providers across the country, such as psychiatrists, social workers, and therapists, who have regular contact and conversations with children and their families, to continue to reinforce knowledge and tips to help navigate social media. Before we get into the potential downsides of social media, it's important to remember that it's not all bad. There are several positive aspects of social media today. Our children use technology daily as a way to connect, learn, and express themselves. At the top of the list, we have connection and communication. What is the number one complaint you might get if you take away your teenager's phone? Most likely, it's going to be a variation or, how am I supposed to talk to anyone now? Most of us came from a time where phone calls were the main way to connect with our friends. However, this is almost non-existent in today's landscape. Children rely on messaging and technology for almost all forms of communication outside the immediate household. Quite a few kids these days, such as those with maybe severe social anxiety or autism spectrum diagnoses, or others who might feel marginalized by mainstream youth, given ethnic or religious backgrounds or LGBTQ+ status, may have difficulty fitting in with peers at their school. Such kids often turn to technology to make new friends. This could range from finding others in chat rooms, game rooms, and various other online forums to find their people. In today's world, I do think it's challenging for all of us to connect in person sometimes, many children are heavily reliant on relationships they've formed or maintained online. Such friendships, those that are safe and genuine, can be both positive and healthy influences on a child's mental health and emotional development overall. Open a child's Snapchat or messaging app, and what's one thing you'll see plenty of? Group texts. While those can be sometimes problematic, which we'll get into later, fundamentally, they do encourage a sense of community, and often they can help foster a sense of group support. And lastly, I think it's safe to say that kids of today can be described as very tech savvy. I'm constantly amazed by some of my patients' creative abilities online, whether it's composing and producing music, video or photo editing, or even entrepreneurship. I think technology provides a very creative outlet that can be very fulfilling. Allowing children to find space online to explore and express themselves is not only very important, but also rewarding at this teenage stage of development. Now, even though there are positives and strengths to technology, there are a few features inherent in social media use specifically that are areas of conflict and concern. With messaging specifically, if you talk to your teenager at home about this, I'm sure you'll gain some insight on some of the unspoken rules teens have created for each other. With how prevalent tech and personal device use is on a basic day-to-day level, we can all agree that it's almost impossible to go a mere 10 minutes without reaching for a cell phone. Whether it's work emails, school applications, Google Maps, we as a society have created this sense of 24/7 digital availability. Children know and are aware of how accessible they are to reaching their peers through social media. This creates a sense of tension, whether it's externally or internally driven, to answer text messages, posts, and Snapchats quickly. Waiting 30 minutes to answer a group chat sometimes provides a sense of anxiety for children, whether it's fearing they're too late to answer or missing out on an important topic of conversation. Some teenagers have even shared with me aspects similar to a code between individual friendships of always being available for each other. This can create unhealthy boundaries in friendships. Developmentally, we know that children and teens are still in stages of vital brain development, specifically strengthening areas of the prefrontal cortex, which aids in the development of impulse control. Interestingly, there are studies that show a possible biological reason kids can seem so hooked to screens. Between the ages of 10 to 12, which is the same age the average child in America receives their first cell phone, in the ventral striatum or reward center of the brain, there is a dramatic increase in receptors for the hormone oxytocin and the neurotransmitter dopamine. These are two biological agents that drive feelings of satisfaction and happiness. This has been shown to predispose preteens to find reward and pleasure in seeking out validation and attention from others. Teens that have increased positive social media use have been studied to have measurable increases in the ventral striatum activation, thus fueling the drive for social rewards, such as likes, responses, and comments. Another important difference in the realm of communication through technology is inherent in what makes written communication, such as through text messages, social media comments, different than in-person communication. This is the lack of nonverbal cues. Such cues, such as tone, emotive speech, facial expression, body language, and humor, are often important in the proper interpretation of the meaning behind a message. Now, this graphic on the right is a simplistic example, but it does show how the word whatever alone can be interpreted in 10 different ways. Now, imagine receiving a text message or a comment on your social media that could be interpreted in 10 different ways. The chances of being able to capture exactly what the sender or commentator was trying to convey is very difficult. The ambiguity itself can lead to misunderstandings, conflict, and sometimes even emotional distress. Dating back to the 1950s, a popular sociologist named Irving Goffman was the first to introduce this idea of the theory of presentation of self. This theory showed that we as humans have this innate tendency to attempt to control and portray ourselves in society in the best possible light. This can often be translated into social media use by how and what we choose to post about ourselves. Oftentimes, we strive to post an overwhelmingly positive and not always completely accurate picture of who we are online. While a survey of postings on any social media platform are often positive, the effective response they can receive are not always so positive. While sometimes people can report feeling inspired by what they see online, it can also bring up a number of negative emotions, such as negative comparisons, jealousy, sadness, which is often driven by the fear of missing out, and sometimes even anger or frustration with the things that you may or may not have. Bullying amongst children, unfortunately, is not a new concept. However, with the integration of technology, cyberbullying itself differs than traditional bullying in a sense that it presents us with new challenges. Cyberbullying amongst teens comes in many forms, but some of the most common are receiving intentionally hurtful text messages, emails, or direct messages on social media sites. This can also sometimes be known as trolling or dissing, spreading rumors or lies about someone online, people sending images or videos intended to humiliate or embarrass someone, and then people sending threats to someone as well. And lastly, people setting up or using fake online profiles to embarrass or intimidate someone. And that can be known as this term called spoofing. While traditional bullying, of course, is very emotionally damaging, there are a few aspects of cyberbullying specifically that make it different in some unique ways. For example, it's being done more often, with no limit on who can view or take place in cyberbullying, and the fact that it can be conducted often under an anonymous online persona. This makes it more available and accessible to youth. Secondly, once completed, it can be very widespread. If completed through posts online, it's very difficult to remove or take down that content once it's posted. That being said, we know that cyberbullying can be damaging in many ways. The common effects of cyberbullying on teenagers can range from lower school attendance and performance, increased stress and anxiety, feelings of isolation and fear, poor concentration, depressive symptoms, decreased self-esteem and confidence, and then suicidal thoughts and self-injurious behaviors. Parenting tools that we can all use to help teens navigate these complexities of social media. We all know there's no one size fits all approach when it comes to how to parent, and that also extends into social media use. Each child has their own unique set of biological, psychological, and social strengths and weaknesses. Assessing one's level of maturity also includes a survey and understanding of a child's own self-regulation skills, intellectual development, and level of comprehension of risks. As you know your child best, make mindful decisions about what you believe your child can and cannot handle. If your child is linked to mental health providers, they can also be an additional resource and is helping with the decision to determine specific limits to impose. The first tool to discuss is this process of how to orient your child or teen when they're ready to gain access to social media or technology. Experts often recommend an onboarding type of process to orient those youth to social media once given their first device. This starts with a simple conversation, suggested to be even before a child gets their first device, to have open discussions about social media with children. I do believe that knowledge is power, and it's important before allowing a child to download a specific app that you yourself are familiar with it. Download the app on your own phone and familiarize yourself with its settings, methods of use, and functionality. Once you decide your child's ready, onboard them to each specific app. Have them download the app in front of you, go through settings together, ask and answer 2 questions together. What privacy settings make sense? What privacy settings make sense for your child, and who will be allowed to see their content? 2 actions that would also be important is to friend your child on your own personal account, and second, to actively monitor their use. At a young age, monitor your child's daily use, posts, and friends more actively, and then loosen the reins at your own comfort level as they get older and prove to be more responsible digital users. Here, I'd like to review some general recommendations by the American Academy of Pediatrics when it comes to screen and technology use in kids. Starting with very young children, less than 2 years of age, it's important to avoid all screens if possible. Starting at age 2, experts recommend up to 1 hour of quality programming alongside a parent. Between the ages of 5 and 11, start to introduce the idea of boundaries with technology. This could be done by designating media-free zones in the house and then avoid utilizing tech time as a specific reward or punishment for behavior, as this sometimes lead to or add to a level of overvalue to technology, which is something that children will just find more desirable in their day-to-day lives. And remember to continue to encourage healthy hobbies and fulfilling activities outside of screen use as well. With our preteens and teenagers, this is often the time where social media is introduced. Again, it is important to encourage consistent use of privacy settings. Remind teenagers to never share their passwords, even with best friends, significant others, etc. That could really leave them vulnerable to being hacked or having content posted on their accounts that could be damaging. To protect privacy, it's also important that teens are reminded to be cautious of who they allow to see their own content and not to friend strangers, leaving them at risk to additional conflict or cyberbullying. Lastly, a few sites I came across while putting together this presentation introduced this cute rule of like, what would grandma say, as a way to regulate the context and content of what children post. It's important to remind children that once posted on the internet, it can really be permanent. We've all heard stories in the news of previous ill-humored posts of people's past resurfacing in the present day, leaving them open to consequences of their prior actions. All content and posts a child posts should be posted under the guise that one day future college admissions administrators and even future employers may see them. This should encourage children to think twice about posting something that could be harmful. One tool I came across that I found very helpful is a social media plan, which was created by the American Academy of Pediatrics. This tool, it's a very interactive and personalized online plan builder that can be created for a family with specific individual customizations. The family media plan includes a list of media priorities to choose from, practical tips embedded in the design, which can help make the plan work and be more practical for each family, reminders as to why it's important, and the ability to print or share your finished plan, and the option to save your plan and return to it as often as you'd like to make changes. Now, when it comes to specific content-based limits and guidelines, there are a few special rules to keep in mind. It's recommended to regularly monitor as much as possible to minimize an adolescent's exposure to psychologically maladaptive behaviors, including content that encourages children or youth to engage in self-harm or high-risk behaviors. And this also includes like disordered eating type concerns. Try to limit adolescents' use of social media for primarily beauty or appearance-related content. Minimize and monitor for exposure to content that may promote discrimination, prejudice, harm, cyberbullying, especially directed towards groups targeted because of race, ethnicity, gender, sexual orientation, religion, or disability status. Limit social media use as to not to interfere with children or adolescents' sleep or physical activity, as both are required for healthy brain and psychological development. And lastly, monitor for adolescent signs of problematic social media use, which can impair their ability to engage in society and may present risk for more serious psychological harms over time. In terms of those specific signs of problematic social media use, this includes a tendency to use social media even when adolescents realize that they do kind of want to cut down or stop on their use individually. The second is spending excessive effort to ensure social media use and access to it. Next is strong cravings to use social media or disruptions from other activities from using social media too much. Fourth would be repeatedly spending more time on social media than is intended. And fifth would be lying or using deceptive behavior to retain access to social media use. And then finally is the loss or disruption of significant relationships or educational opportunities because of their media use. As a parent, one of the most important roles that you have is to teach children conflict resolution skills, and how to navigate social conflicts in technology is just as important. Let's walk through a hypothetical scenario together, such as a child feeling frustrated, sad, or angry after finding out through Snapchat that their group of friends were hanging out last weekend and your child wasn't extended an invite. The first step would be to be an active listener. Try to gather information in a calm, approachable, and gentle manner. Learn the context of the situation best you can, especially from your child's point of view. By providing a safe space where the child can bring up concerns without fear of judgment or scrutiny. Validating their emotions is a very powerful way to help teens navigate their feelings and provide a sense of acceptance for their thoughts. Remember, validating does not necessarily mean agreement. Provide a validating statement in this case, such as, so you feel disappointed you weren't able to attend that party last weekend, if a teenager presents with feelings of frustration and hurt. Collaboratively come up with a plan of action. Try to decide on at least one that seems approachable and that your child agrees is doable and easy to navigate. An example in our hypothetical scenario would be to invite some friends the child felt they missed out on with hanging out with to come over the following weekend for a hangout or a movie night in the home. It's important to problem solve out loud possible things that could go wrong, such as worries that no one might show up or that they might say no because they already have plans, to avoid future or further conflict and also build a sense of resilience. Finally, it's important to find time for reflection. This is probably better to do at a later time when emotion is removed from the situation, to revisit the incident actively with your child. Ask them to attempt to draw their own conclusions about how technology may have added a heightened layer of conflict to the situation. This could encourage awareness and insight into the difficulties that come with technology use. It also prevents a possible future conflict, if not how to avoid them, how to be more resilient and cope with them independently. While allowing children to be the active manager of their conflicts online, it's a very powerful way to reinforce conflict resolution skills. But there are times as a parent that you may have to step in and play a more direct intervening role, such as encouraging children to block, flag, or report a problematic comment, content, or user on an application. Next, if an obvious pattern forms or an agreed plan of action does not work between you and your child, collect evidence such as screenshots of cyberbullying and printed messages for safekeeping and to utilize in the future if needed. If the cyberbully is a known individual, such as a peer or a classmate, consider reaching out to the parents of the perpetrator if that feels right to you, or involve the school directly. And lastly, if the abuse directly threatens your child's safety, consider involving law enforcement. How do we make our children feel good? What are their own personal values and how can they reflect those online? And how do we help children feel whole even when they see upsetting things on social media? And lastly, how do we create safe spaces for them even if bullying can follow them into their homes with technology? The first way that we can empower our children is by helping them build happy, fulfilling, and confident senses of self. Remind children that they are more than their online presence. Encourage healthy hobbies and authentic moments offline. A common suggestion is to plan at least one screen-free activity to complete together as a family every day. For example, this could be cooking a favorite dish, spending time connecting during car rides without screens, or walking the dog together after dinner. Such activities promote mindfulness, being present in the moment, and is also good for parents. Time away from screens and with children is a great way to bond and strengthen our relationships at home. The next would be to practice self-compassion. Remind children to treat themselves with kindness, openness, and acceptance. And lastly, studies show that there is true strength in the sense of community. One way to help children feel they have a more active role in theirs is to encourage activities that center around helping others, including volunteer work and social advocacy. The next is to help children set healthy boundaries between themselves and their tech. This is especially important if your child is noticing a link between exposure to their phones and negative emotions, or a downturn in their mental health. Encourage that boundary setting. Examples of healthy boundary setting include muting notifications, such as notifications to specific group chats or apps, and to check them at a designated time or date. Secondly, teach children how to maintain them or keep themselves accountable, such as specific settings on their iPhone to kind of limit screen time for certain applications. Thirdly, would be to create and maintain tech-free spaces in the home, such as the dinner table or family room. By doing this, this allows children to visit a safe place physically when they encounter social conflicts online, and that can serve as a haven or a type of escape where they can find that space to actively work on those conflict resolution skills that you're reinforcing. Thirdly, as parents, it's important to model responsible use. And this can be done in 3 different ways. Be mindful of what you as parents use your screens for. For example, use phones and technology in creative and mentally stimulating ways and show your children. Specific examples could include using creativity-based applications, such as for art and drawing, mindfulness activities, and fitness tracking. Second, be aware of when you choose to use your screens. Model good behavior. Try to avoid looking at your phone or Apple Watch notifications mid-conversation, especially if your children are present and having a conversation with you, because they are definitely watching. Another good idea is to avoid bringing your own cell phone, tablet, or laptop into the bedroom. By showing kids that you set healthy boundaries for yourself, such as charging them downstairs or in a separate space, you also encourage your children to do the same. And that can help your child feel comfortable charging their own devices in that same safe space, which discourages use in the late evening or overnight. And lastly, keep the dialogue open. Show by talking to your kids about your own self-enforced limits with tech and how you've set them for yourself. Discuss patterns you might have discovered yourself about your own use and how it's impacted your own mental health. These are just a few of the applications available to parents to help with some of the limit setting that we previously discussed. And then at the bottom, there's a link to that social media family plan by the Academy of Pediatrics. And then finally, some books I came across that also seem to be great resources for self-reading, for teens to read, and even to read to like younger kids, just introducing them to the idea of internet safety and screen time limits.
Thank you so much for sharing all of that helpful information. We've got a few questions that came in already, and we do continue to encourage people to add questions into the chat as things come up in this part of the discussion. I wanted to start with a question that came in about what you would do if your teen was actually being harassed over text or repeated FaceTime calls, like prank calling or spam calling, and it was happening multiple times daily, but it was happening outside of school hours. What do you suggest a parent do?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the most important thing, again, goes back to open conversation, trying to elicit as much information as you can from your kid about who the perpetrators might be, the information that's being shared, or what the content of the harassment is. And then boundary setting, like, is there a possibility? I think with text messages, if it's simple text messaging, you could probably report to your cell phone provider to try to block that messaging or find out who the sender might be, if that would be helpful. And then on social media apps, I would recommend going through the application and trying to find through the privacy settings or ways to report the user or block them. And if you know who the perpetrator is, I do think it should be treated similar to how you would come across bullying in real life. Have a conversation with the parents if you know them, report to school if they're a classmate. But if it is true harassment in the way that your child might feel unsafe, I would recommend considering involving law enforcement at that point.
Thank you. There are probably a lot of parents of teenagers here, and a question that came up a few times is we never really did establish strong rules around technology and social media in our house. And now we're wondering, how do we go back? Can we go back? It sort of feels like it's too late to start enforcing rules on our teenagers at this point.
That is a great question. I know a lot of what I presented was about onboarding and prevention, but I can appreciate in those cases, it is hard to take a step backwards. I think in those roles and like with working with teenagers in general, it's a lot of modeling and collaboratively coming up with plans together. And with teenagers, it's especially important to have their buy-in. So by talking to your teen openly about what feelings they might have about their social media use, like, is it causing frustration or anxiety? Do you feel like you feel down after using it? That will get things started just by opening the conversation honestly and helping teens kind of recognize themselves that maybe they should be holding themselves accountable and setting limits for themselves and healthy boundaries with their social media. If like you haven't established a specific time limit to applications, I think I would bring it up with a teenager, like show them maybe, hey, you know what? Like I actually try to set a limit for myself. I try not to go on Facebook for more than 30 minutes a day because I get overwhelmed. Like, do you think that's something that you could do to kind of help manage the feelings that you're having with your social media use? I think that could be really helpful.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I think too about doing the process gradually, right? As opposed to a cold turkey method where you're going to get into a huge conflict with your teen. But if we can incrementally make changes that don't feel super impactful in the moment, but over time create that bigger difference. Yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Can you speak a little more to the actual effects that you see in your practice day to day as regards to social media use and conflict that kids are getting in? And what can parents look for exactly?
If this social media use is impairing their day-to-day function, I think that is where you need to start working on ways to set those healthy boundaries. In like my day-to-day practice, I think what I hear of mostly is with kids that struggle with anxiety or depression, how social media plays into that. It's very complex and it's definitely present. I think that kids are more prone to feeling down if they have like a depressive disorder just by looking through social media posts and seeing what they're missing out on. And that can be really difficult, especially also kids with anxiety, just feeling marginalized in some way by some content they come across. And so those are the ways that I see it most often in practice. And again, like I try my best to kind of have an open conversation with children about their use and try to get those wheels turning about how to be more accountable and responsible users themselves. And I know that their therapists are constantly having those conversations with them as well.
Just tied to that, I'm curious. I feel like as cyberbullying was becoming more of an issue, part of what people were saying was like, wow, behind a screen when you can hide your face or you can even be anonymous in some ways, people are a little bolder than things that they might say in person before cyberbullying was an option. I wonder if that's transferring now. Do you see people even becoming more brazen in person because they're used to speaking in that way to other people when previously they hadn't?
That's really interesting. I haven't seen a direct pattern there. I do think that there's a saying like everyone becomes a hero behind a screen. And I think that also goes along with like bullying. I think people just kind of feel with that cloak of feeling anonymous or removed in some way, they can be more bold and say things that they wouldn't typically say in person. So I haven't seen that exact correlation, but I do think overall, like because of some of the specific comments that people are saying online that are very harmful and damaging, it could lead to people being a little bit more like prone to saying things in real situations. I haven't seen like the direct correlation, but I do think it's tied in some way. Sorry, I know that was a roundabout way of answering that question, but
No, I'm not sure any of us have answers, but it's just interesting to see these patterns in human behavior, right? As we're all kind of working through this together. One parent asked this question, which I'm guessing many will resonate with. My son is a junior in high school. I used to have a rule about charging our phones in the hall, phones turned in by 10:30 p.m., but I relaxed those last year as he was really pushing back on taking responsibility for himself, and I let it go. Now he has his face in his phone until he shuts his eyes. What do I do?
Yeah, I think a lot of people would feel similarly and have the same struggle that you have there. Again, a junior in high school, that is really a difficult age because in 2 years, when they go to college, if they go to college, and once they are living independently, they have full reign over their tech use. So I think it's when working with older adolescents, trying to help them realize that some of the values or things that they're working towards in their life, like, could be somewhat affected by how much they're using social media. Like, the first thing that comes to mind is, I know a lot of kids are very motivated by sports, and is frustrated because maybe they're not performing the way they want to on the basketball team. Maybe you could gently point out to them, hey, like, I think it would be really great if you spent maybe 40 minutes, every other day practicing shooting hoops or going to the gym with your friends. Like, do you think that maybe you could allow for that? And what if he's like, I don't have time? You could say, you know what, I was looking at like our family plan and I noticed that you spend an hour and a half on Instagram every night. Like, do you think that that would make sense to kind of maybe see if we can cut down on that a little bit and make time for other things in your life that are working towards the goals that you want to achieve? I think that's a really great way to kind of get that buy-in from teenagers and hopefully have them kind of recognize that they need to hold themselves accountable and set some healthy boundaries with their tech for themselves.
I think that's such a great point. And I talk with parents a lot about that, those teenage years just prior to their launch, and how if we as parents are being too restrictive or what feels punitive to kids, then they might bounce to the complete other side as soon as they are independent. And so helping work with them to create that balance before they've blown the coop. Absolutely. Mm-hmm. From what you said, it sounds like it's really important to help our kids identify how to name and understand their feelings, so then they can feel empowered to notice when they're using social media. Can you speak a little more to that and really how to help them do that?
Yeah, I think this is a really difficult thing for us to do as parents. And I think, as a mental health provider, for children, it's really about helping them understand themselves and their emotions. And so I know a kid might not elegantly say, I'm feeling frustrated because I noticed I missed out on this last weekend. I think the way you would probably see it is them maybe yelling, screaming, feeling really sad on the weekend, and not really being able to verbalize, like, what is it making them feel that way? And so by having an open conversation with them, maybe like, if you notice there's like something that might be harmful or hurting, or maybe something that's going on with your child, try to open up the conversation, ask them, did something happen? Did you notice something online? And maybe they feel like sharing, yeah, I noticed Maddie and like her friends were hanging out last weekend and I wasn't there. And then you can help them draw those connections. Say, I noticed yesterday you got really frustrated with your sister. Do you think that that might be because of what you saw on social media? And then helping them realize that, yeah, I think I was feeling angry because I felt left out, and helping them kind of draw that connection. Remember, validating emotions, it doesn't mean agreement. I think that's a really important statement. I think just acknowledging your kids' feelings for what they are is helping them feel like that's okay to feel that way, and help them think of solutions to kind of help manage those difficult behaviors.
And you're talking about feelings in general, but you pointed out that one about that FOMO, and just how aware everyone is in moments when they are being left out now. And that can be a very real thing. It's not even just a perception. Now they can see that it is in fact a reality. And, one of the questions was about social anxiety and the media use and knowing when you're being left out and or no longer cool. And how would you talk to your child when they feel so alone and when that is their true experience?
Exactly. Yeah.
And so are there, in advising that child, I mean, let's say we're all naming it, we're acknowledging it, we're saying like, this really sucks. And of course, you feel awful about it. How do you help move them through that feeling?
First, I think, yeah, again, validating, acknowledging it, saying it out loud, letting your child express like how they're feeling is the first step. And then I think it's, again, coming up with a way or a plan to kind of navigate that specific situation specifically. So if it's feeling angry because they were feeling left out, I think acknowledge that that happened, but then think about ways to kind of problem solve how to go forward. So if this is a friendship that your child values and thinks brings value to their life and is one that they hope to maintain in the future, work on ways to kind of bring that back. Ask them, would you feel open to extending an invite in the future with so and so, and then in a way that the child feels is like a manageable or doable plan that they can feel comfortable carrying forwards. As a parent, I know sometimes you just want to protect your children from what's out there, but I think like it's really an important role that you have is to teach them how to manage their feelings and kind of problem solve in productive ways to kind of work towards what it is they're seeking out and want in life. So if it's maintaining relationships, finding new friendships, help them kind of think of productive ways forward to kind of cultivate that. And that can help them feel more connected and feel that they're working towards the goal that they want.
And, that's speaking to emotions on an individual level. And I'm curious about emotions on a more societal level. I think we've all at this point read that kids are reporting feeling more lonely than they ever have before, yet they're online more than they ever have before. Can you just speak to that topic and that connection a little bit and how it affects our kids' well-being?
Even though I think there's great things about technology, like, for example, Zoom is considered a social media application, and that's how we're all able to connect today and talk about this. There is definitely a difference between tech face communication and face-to-face communication. As humans in society, one of the pillars that we all need to live productive and happy lives is connection socially. And even though technology and social media is a tool that we all use to feel more connected, there are things that are missing than in the realm of tech in comparison to in person. Being able to connect with one's humor, feel a sense of warmth, being able to even, understand exactly one's point of view. There are things that are missing through technology that, I think that we really need to find time to connect with people in person. Unfortunately, with the pandemic, there was a lot of that was put on hold. I've been very pleasantly surprised by efforts that like the community has had to kind of bring that piece back. I think it's wonderful when parents are able to find time to have their kids fulfill hobbies, groups outside of school, spending time with friends in person. I think these should just be very high on like a list of things that we're hoping our kids achieve and like their list of priorities, because there's a unique value to that is missing in social media and technology use.
Yes, to all of that. Somebody wrote here, I see my college age nieces and nephews posting videos of their partying, and I worry about their underage drinking appearing on social media. It's not their conflict, it's my conflict. Should I get involved? I'm the aunt in this situation.
I thank you for that question. Again, I think it's that's a very difficult one because I know that children and teenagers and college age students, like they like to share what they're doing with everyone that they're friends with online. But I think an important reminder for everyone to know is that once it's posted online, really you have to remember that it is there permanently. It can be screenshotted, it can be saved by other people that view it. And if it's something you wouldn't want a future employer or a future in-law, anyone that you wouldn't want them seeing that side of you, it really shouldn't be posted online. I think this is where I know kids were still developing our impulse control. And I think kids don't always think so proactively. They really focus on the here and now and try not to, they don't really spend a lot of time thinking about the adult versions of themselves. But as an aunt, as a caretaker or caregiver, I think it's important to remind them of that.
Can you speak a little bit, Dr. Sandhu, to the idea of using screen time as a reward or alternatively as a consequence, either framing it as, you got all the things you needed to done, and so I'm going to reward you with access to your phone and additional screen time. Does that place too much importance on phones and social media? Or vice versa, I have parents a lot of the time saying, like, my kid is not consistently turning in their homework, and so no phone access, we're taking it away as a consequence until your work gets done or you meet whatever your responsibilities are. Can you speak to that a little?
I know a lot of us do that with, especially using it as a punishment because it's something that a kid really values. And so this is also tricky unless it's ingrained from like that earlier age. I think like with younger kids, easier said than done, definitely, but try to prioritize or use other things outside of tech as specific rewards or punishment. I think when we use technology such as iPad time as a punishment or something that you can earn, it's going to put iPad time on a pedestal. And we know that kids are going to always be looking for what's coming, what can they work towards, whatever seems like the high value item, that's what they're going to want. So I think trying to find other things that, again, a child's motivated by, that they enjoy to use instead of technology would be the way to avoid that overvalue notion with technology. And same with punishments. Again, it's tricky to do that backwards because I know once kids view their phone as their most prized possession, it's hard to kind of use anything but when you really are trying to get your point across. But again, maybe if you can brainstorm other things that could be used as punishment. And again, tell them as long as they're being responsible technology users, the phone is something that they can have access to an extent.
You mentioned at some point in your presentation about limiting use for specific content. Can you speak to ways to actually do that? I mean, how do we manage what our children are watching and using and doing on their phones when they're on?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great question. When I was looking for the resources, this is one way to do it. There was a resource called Bark. I think it's an application you can find on like the App Store on your phone. It actually does screen and restrict content on specific applications such as Instagram, TikTok. I know it's hard to do in these days, like with the algorithms that are out there. It's very difficult to kind of restrict specific content, but apps like that can be very effective, especially also, I think there's one, it's like Norton Family. I think like maybe it sends you an alert if they tell you that your child's looking up specific self-harm related things, or if that's coming up on their TikTok algorithms. Hopefully giving you some control and being able to kind of help restrict those specific harmful content from your child.
You talked about how there's no one size fits all, right? And we do have to consider our children's individual needs and their brains. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts for people who are particularly prone to potentially developing addictive patterns or having a brain like an ADHD brain where they do have more trouble self-regulating and their brain is searching for that dopamine more frequently. Is there any special advice to give when you know your child's going to struggle with these things more even than the typical child?
Yeah, I think that that's a great question. if you know that your child's a little bit more prone to self-regulation deficits or impulse control difficulty, I think those are the times where you need to be a little bit more aware and consistent with what limits you're implementing. Start slow, go slow with like the amount of freedom you want to give your child with their tech use, because you know your child best. And if you're worried that they're going to continue to escalate their use to a point where it's really hard to rein it back in, prevention to get to that point is like the easiest way. So I think that's a great question. But yeah, I think that if you know your kid's a little bit more impulsive or more prone to an addictive type of personality, I think it's important to be really consistent and set those limits mindfully. Also make sure consistency is key. Make sure that you and maybe who else is in the family, the other parent, that you guys are on the same page, because kids are smart and they know how to pin parents against each other and kind of like play the field, so to speak. So I think it's important to be consistent.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. This has been so helpful. And we really appreciate your time and you taking the opportunity to share this really helpful advice and these specific tips for parents. We really appreciate having you here.
Thank you. No, it's great being here. Thank you so much.
Brilliant. And then we do have one event. Catch has an event coming up in January that we wanted to let you know about. It's Michelle Icard, who's the author of two fantastic books. One is 8 Setbacks That Can Make a Child a Success, and one is 14 Talks by Age 14. She will be here in Northbrook in person on January 30th, and we would love to have you attend. So look out for those promotional materials and please register to join us. Thank you all for being here with us today. And thank you again, Dr. Sandhu.